Well, as COVID-19 pandemic enters its second year, many people are suffering from poor mental health, coupled with the effects of lockdowns, fears about the effectiveness of various manufactured vaccines, restricted movement within and beyond their environments, a bleak economic outlook, and, of course, in Nigeria, the issue of abduction of school children. The question now facing many countries, especially Nigeria, amid the pandemic and the frequent abduction of students, is how to manage the unprecedented number of people who may need mental health assistance in the current situation of things. Joining us now is Professor AKINDOTUN MERINO, a behavioral health commissioner in County of San Bernardino in the United States, also the chief academic officer, mental health advocate, a system psychologist, and author of several books. Glad to have you join us.
Thank you.
All right, let's start this way. As a mental health expert, what would be your initial response to these released girls or captives in generally?
Yeah, thank you for having me here. I think the first thing we need to know is that we're glad that they're back and that they've been released, and the health checkup that was done for them is good, but the mental health impact on this particular group of girls and all those who have been abducted is significant and is going to last for a long time. So we can't just check them up medically and send them home. We need to have some psychological help for them so that they can begin to deal with the trauma of being kidnapped. Because what happens is trust has been broken, the meaning of their life has been broken because trauma has now started in their lives. So what trauma does is it actually impacts, it severs you from yourself. And so these kids or these girls need to know that they're okay. So we hope that we can get some mental health help for them.
Okay. Professor, how would you appraise our mental health culture here in Nigeria? Because even when you look at the broader perspective, you have people who are around this trauma, as you identified it, to do with the abductions, whether it's people in our profession, and a lot of the attitude is to get up and keep going. How would you appraise our culture when it comes to mental health, and what should we do to get us on the right track?
Thank you. That's a good question. Well, mental health in our context, in the African context, is almost something new. It's people think, you can pray about it, you can get up and keep moving. But even in the United States, where I come from, in my part of the country, we also need to we have to reach out to minority groups like African American groups, faith groups, because they don't really believe that mental health is a thing sometimes. And so that's the same thing in this culture, that you can sustain pain and emotional trauma and keep going. So let me give you an example. You're driving on a freeway or driving on the road and you get to a pothole. Well, you can if it's small enough, you can keep going. But if it's a big pothole, you have to get up, get out of your car and take care of the car. So trauma is actually wounding. It's emotional wound. And that emotional wound doesn't go away unless we triage it. So I think we need a national coming together in Nigeria, and people need to know that we can't keep moving on, because when you're traumatized, you can't live your best life. You cannot be as creative as you should be. That's why people leave sometimes and they go outside of the country and they can bloom, because it's not as traumatic. So we need to know that this thing called trauma is here, it happens all the time, and we need to focus on it. We need to address it as a nation, as states, governments, governors, and as local governments.
Indeed. Well, bringing it back specifically to the abducted student, these girls being the most recent, what is likely to be your initial clinical assessment, having been in the abductors den for about 4 or 5 days? And should the children be part of conversations and decisions to reintegrate them into society? And how important is having them, be part of that conversation?
Yeah, so what needs to happen is we can't just send them to their homes and say you'd be okay. There should be some type of group therapy for them, or even individual therapies, depending on how significant it is. but these girls have bonded in what we call a trauma bond. So there's a bond with them because of the trauma that they went through. So what needs to happen is to help them cope, understand what happened. See, what trauma comes to do is sever your meaning for life. Everything is upside down now. They're not sure what happened to them. They're traumatized, and it's not just a matter of we can just keep moving. No, we have to go, because when we talk about trauma, the brain itself goes through a change. So there is the chemicals pumping through their bodies right now, and that needs to be alleviated. So we need to get them in group therapy minimally and help them go through this for at least 12 weeks.
Well, while we're still at that, let's talk about COVID-19. Do you see any correlation between the mental health of individuals and COVID-19?
We have a global pandemic, we have a global recession, in addition to everything else. There's been studies that has actually told us that the effect of COVID-19 is systemic, it's pervasive, and it actually hinders mental health. When we talk about mental health, people think of mental illness. You don't have to be chronically ill to have mental health issues. So not all of us will be traumatized by COVID-19. Not all of us will be traumatized by not all the girls will be traumatized by the abduction, because trauma is individual response, but it can also be collective. So collectively, people are isolated in their homes. People are thinking of economic issues. How are they going to, buy the next whatever they're going to buy? There are people who are going through depressed syndromes. Anxiety is on the rise. Our teenagers are really panicked. They don't know what's going to happen. Their world is caved in for them. So yes, it impacts our mental health. And as a nation, we need to talk about it. One of the reasons when I come here and I want to talk about this is we need to push this, the awareness that this is important. It has to be a national awareness campaign, and it also has to be different states doing it, the faith leaders, everybody it has to be all hands on deck for mental health awareness. Because if we don't do it, there's actual monetary impact on this. The Nigerian economy actually is significantly impacted because of mental health issues. I think the last I checked was 22-point-something billion naira are lost because of mental health issues. Because when your employee is impacted, mental health impacts, they will not be the most creative. They will call off from work. They will not be the most productive, and that way it impacts the economy. So when we're talking about bottom lines, business people, we need to know that if your employees are well, then you will be doing well. Your return on investment is how well they're doing mentally.
Okay, Professor, you did well to attach a figure to that, because that's usually where the shoe pinches. Just stay with us. We'll come back to the conversation after the break. Okay, you're watching Newsday, and we're still with Professor AKINDOTUN MERINO, a behavioral health commissioner from San Bernardino. I won't go through everything, but she's talking to us about mental health. So we left off where you were putting a figure, 22 billion, you said, is the cost or the price tag to our neglecting to attend to mental health issues. But I just want to ask, let's talk baby steps and practical solutions for people who can't afford necessarily to go to a therapist, or even looking at the parents of the abducted school children who've been returned. One of our correspondents said some of the boys from Kagara are already manifesting symptoms of what looks like post-traumatic syndrome. So they wake up in the night and they're shouting, "Where am I?" And they're not sleeping, they're suffering from insomnia. What do the parents in that situation do? And then speaking for the individuals who may be feeling that they're out of sorts because of COVID, because of one trauma or the other, what can they do as far as self-therapy is concerned?
Good question, thank you. I think the first thing is allow them to share their stories, because what happens after trauma is people usually isolate and they don't want to talk. So the first thing you want to do is allow them to share their stories, and they might not want to talk to the parent. And so one of the things that the parents might want to do is let the children come together, if they have a friend within the group, and let them talk, keep talking, because what happens with talking is at least you're able to process it. One of the reasons why we are, trauma becomes locked up in the body is we don't allow time to process it. So you can do that. They allow them to share their stories, and don't minimize their stories. Don't tell them that their stories are not significant. Let them talk about the story of trauma and acknowledge it. And this goes for everybody, not just the girls that were kidnapped or the boys that were kidnapped. It's everyone who went through some kind of trauma in life. When somebody comes to you and they're sharing their story, honor that story. Let them validate it for them. Let them know that they're not crazy, that this really happened and this is significant. The other thing we have to do, one of the things is trauma is also stored in the body. Trauma is stored in the body. So one of the things that you can do is exercise. I mean, literally consistent walking, or some kind of walking, running, some kind of exercise, dancing, anything will allow you to shake it off a little, dislodge the trauma a little bit from your body. So let them consistently do that, because when you walk and when you exercise, it actually releases all kinds of good hormones. You're going to release dopamine, which is good, energizes you. Serotonin is released, so that is good. The other thing is, don't try to hug them.
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you. Unfortunately, that's the much we could take, but very helpful.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for being on NEWSDAY.